Can President Trump really deliver a quick end to the war in Ukraine, or is reality getting in the way? Recent negotiations in Saudi Arabia have not led to an agreement aimed at halting hostilities, but there is an agreement on ensuring safe navigation in this critical region. I'm Andrij Dobriansky, and today's Newsmaker is the Ukraine-Russia ceasefire. There was hope that a ceasefire in the Black Sea could pave the way for a lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. But the U.S.-led talks in the Saudi capital have shown that challenges persist. Russia is seeking sanctions relief as a condition for full compliance, while Ukraine, on the other hand, is expressing concerns over potential concessions. An agreement would have been a significant step forward, but now, more likely than not, a full ceasefire within 30 days is slipping out of reach. Here's more on the story.
After days of negotiations in Saudi Arabia, a result of sorts: a partial truce in the ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine didn't talk directly with each other. Rather, they held separate meetings with US negotiators and made their own agreements. And the partial ceasefire is full of conditions and is limited in scope. Ukraine and Russia agreeing to halt military strikes on vessels in the Black Sea. A modest and tempered response from Ukraine's president.
It's too early to say that it will work, but these were the right meetings, the right decisions, the right steps. No one can accuse Ukraine of not moving towards sustainable peace after this.
Pledges to support a 30-day pause on both nations' targeting of energy infrastructure were also announced, but backdated to March 18.
We are in favor of considering ways to avoid causing any damage to energy infrastructure. This is not in our interests. And as the President said, we are in favor of resuming the Black Sea Initiative in some form, in a form more acceptable to all.
But shortly after the US announced the energy infrastructure ceasefire, Russia said these would only take effect if certain economic sanctions were lifted, and Russia continues to send drones to target Ukraine anyway. The US agreed to help lift sanctions on Russia's international agricultural and fertilizer exports. Zelensky, meanwhile, described this as a weakening of positions. And it was his understanding, he said, that truce agreements didn't require sanctions relief to come into force. He also accused the Kremlin of trying to manipulate the deals. In Ukraine, many shared Zelensky's skepticism.
They never keep their words. All these deals will not be in Ukraine's favor.
Everyone in his government, they are terrorists. That's impossible, completely impossible to believe that this time they indeed will do that they promised.
Exactly how the deals will be enforced isn't yet certain. Overseeing the present truce agreements could come down to multiple third parties.
We agreed with the American side that, in addition to America, third parties can be involved. It's not bad, for example, someone from Europe or, for example, Turkey can be regarding the situation at sea, and maybe someone from the Middle East regarding energy.
Despite words and talk agreeing to a fragile and conditional pause in fighting with narrowly defined terms, any prospects of lasting peace in the foreseeable future at this stage still look a long way from reality.
Joining me now to debate are from New York, Russia's first deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, Dmitry Polyanskiy. From Rome, founder of New Europeans and former Labour MP, Roger Casale. And also from New York, the director of communications for the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, Andrij Dobriansky. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you for this edition of the Newsmakers. Dmitry, let me begin with you. Yes, the two sides have agreed to ensure safe navigations, but the Western interpretation of what lays ahead is that Russia will only implement an agreement to stop using force when certain sanctions are lifted. What is your take with how the talks went?
I think it's not the Western interpretation that is clear from the press release on the side of our president. We said that the Black Sea initiative will be resumed provided these conditions are implemented. Actually, these conditions proceed from the Black Sea grain deal, which was concluded in 2022 and which was not implemented in due way because of the obstruction from Ukrainian side and because the West did not heed its commitments in regards to Russia. So now I think that these things are rectified and the deal looks balanced, provided, of course, it's implemented, which we have very big doubts, knowing the fact that Ukrainian side is not trustworthy.
Okay, Andrij, I have to ask you, Dmitry was saying that there's very big doubts. Here's what President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his nightly address. He said, they are already trying to twist the agreements and actually deceive both our mediators and the whole world. I want to give you a chance to respond and what your take is.
I think this sanctions lifting part is really the questionable part. That didn't seem to be part of the negotiations from either team. And then it was something that was muscled in at the end. Obviously, we read the language from the United States that they will seek to alleviate, seek to help in that regard, but there was no promise made there. The promise that was made was broken in the summer of 2023 when the enemy state decided to keep attacking not only Ukrainian ports as they continued to since that time, but also these vessels that feed most of the world. Through the ingenuity of Ukraine and its Western allies, we see that Ukraine is actually exporting things on a level almost close to what it was exporting at the beginning of the war, before the full-fledged invasion in 2022. So at this point, Russia is basically negotiating for something that the West is already accepting, and the countries that have been accepting or in need of this food already are receiving it. They seem to think that they can get sanctions relief for something that they are trying to block. So in this respect, it's probably a losing gamble on their end, but we'll see what happens.
Dmitry, can I get a quick response from you?
Well, it's difficult to comment all these things because they are very far from reality, and ingenuity of the Ukrainian side was really seen when they tried to smuggle weapons in these ships that were coming to Ukrainian ports, and it was clear from the detonations that were visible on the videos that are available in the internet how, in fact, this deal was used by Ukraine. And also there were attacks from the safe navigation route to Russian ports from Ukrainian water drones. So this was a clear violation, of course, of what we agreed. And again, the deal comprised two parts. One part was about Ukrainian export of Ukrainian grain through Black Sea. The other part was about access of Russian agricultural products and fertilizers to world market. And the second part was not implemented at all. So these guarantees are only reflecting what was promised to us back then and what was not implemented by the West. And I think that US side is acting in good faith, unlike Ukrainian side. So the only hope is pinned on the way US is dealing with this arrangement right now. If it's possible, if it makes it possible to control the Ukrainian vessels to avoid situation of smuggling once again, then I think we have a chance. But we do not have any hopes related to the trustworthiness of the Ukrainian side.
Okay. Andrij, I see that you're not agreeing to this, but before I come back to you, I want to get Roger in this conversation. Roger, thank you for your patience. Your take, and I know that you said before that a ceasefire should come before any negotiations, that Russia is insisting on conditions before stopping hostilities. I mean, to many, this could seem as competing demands, right?
I think it will seem that way. Thank you for the question. And that's very frustrating for all concerned. And what we're hearing now also in this panel discussion is, an exchange of words, things being said about the intentions of the other side. And so all this does is to keep the war of words going forward. What's important is the war on the ground comes to an end, that, or at least in certain areas, that there's a ceasefire, that the violence stops. Of course, there are going to be disagreements about who said what and what was promised and who's acting in good faith and who's not acting in good faith. That is to be expected, and that will go on for years, possibly for decades. But I think the key point is this, that negotiations can't really start, whether it's about sanctions or anything else, until the violence stops. So let's stop the violence and start the negotiations and then have the conversations, rather than sort of making one a condition of the other.
Okay, fair enough. Dmitry, let me come back to you. I mean, the Kremlin has denied making any positive statements about peace talks, but the fact of the matter is that Moscow remains engaged in the discussions. What is your realistic take on the path forward for a cessation of a ceasefire?
Well, I think that the discussions are proceeding in quite a good way. Of course, there are a lot of things to be discussed, and we are cautiously optimistic. The first concrete arrangement was in relation to the Ukrainian crisis, was the agreement not to target infrastructure objects. I think that was absolutely clear from yesterday's statement of the White House, of Kremlin, and I think that even Zelensky accepted this. But we saw already today violation of this arrangement, which Russia is implementing since March 18. There were several attacks on Russian energy infrastructure objects, which was highlighted by our Ministry of Defense. So the way forward is really to rebuild trust. And now we act like two adults in the room, Russia and the United States. Of course, there is still this Western geopolitical project, anti-Russia, aka Ukraine. And it's up to the West to think what to do with it. But we are moving forward in the interest of the whole world. There are a lot of things to be discussed there apart from Ukraine. Ukraine is only one part of the discussions that our presidents are having and hopefully will be having. So I think that we need to take a bigger picture. As for the Ukrainian situation, it's quite clear that Ukraine in any case is losing at the battlefield. Look at what is happening in the Kursk region and elsewhere. I think it's hard to deny it. So this also very much is sensed during the negotiations, because President Trump has the real picture of what's happening and not the propaganda stamps spread by Zelensky and his team.
Okay, Andrij, do you share the cautious optimism that's been expressed by Dmitry, and what is the bigger picture for the Ukrainian side?
Yeah, let me just clarify. That was not cautious optimism. First of all, to even claim that this invading state is doing well when they've had to rely on North Korea sending tens of thousands of troops that bail them out. Ukraine has been standing all on its own and seems to have sunk a third of the ships in the Black Sea. It seems as if our enemy state is the one who's really on the back foot, and that's why they are negotiating to try to have a ceasefire to protect their sites. Unfortunately, what it has become very clear, both in Saudi Arabia and on the ground in Ukraine, is the fact that these facilities that have been quote unquote agreed to are only the ones that in the mind of the aggressor state are the ones that they won't hit. So even Ukraine doesn't know what qualifies as an energy infrastructure location, because locations in Ukraine for processing fuel, for manufacturing it, those have been hit since these discussions have begun happening. So the problem is clear. We know who the aggressor state is. And to describe Ukraine as a problem or a crisis, this is clearly another in a long line of centuries of denigration of our people. And Ukraine will prevail in this. It's so long as the rest of the world keeps on the same track that it's going.
Okay, but since you talked about troops and one side being on the back foot, let me ask you this. I mean, some would argue that that a ceasefire could provide Ukraine time to rebuild its military capacity, while others fear it would allow Russia to actually regroup. What do you think is Ukraine's best strategic option right now?
Ukraine's best strategic option is to continue doing what it's doing, which is working with the international community. There's only one state that's working against the interest of the international community. It's been condemned at the United Nations. Another report just came out 2 weeks ago from the Office of Human Rights that Russia continues to steal children. This is not the action of a good-willing partner, a peace-loving country, as is required at the United Nations. And not somebody who's a trustworthy negotiating partner. As President Zelensky himself mentioned in the United States, 25 times he had an agreement with the Russians. 25 times it has been broken. This is something that's well known in terms of Congress and the Senate. No deal is going to happen so long as more specific language is used. And what we've seen over the last 2 weeks in Saudi Arabia is a bunch of manipulation and no hard specifics, including the fact that they decided to fire on a Ukrainian hospital during the conversation with President Trump. It is beyond reproach.
Okay, Roger, if we sort of set aside some of the specific language that's being used, as Andrij just mentioned, I mean, given the fact that there are attacks that are going on, and you had said that the most important thing is to stop the hostilities, do you believe that an immediate ceasefire is even feasible?
I don't think a complete ceasefire is feasible, but I hope that a partial ceasefire is feasible. And let me respond to Dmitry, because Dmitry said something that I actually quite liked. He said, we have to behave like adults in this. And I think the adults in the room, in terms of the international community, and I'm sure that Andrij would agree with this, what they want to see is, what they're concerned about is the future. They want to see they're more concerned about the future and what happens next than they are about the past. And so, I do appeal to Dmitry to, not persist in this sort of war of words, undermining credibility of others, saying it's the other person's fault. Most people, and I live in Europe, most Europeans, they're not going to be convinced by that. What they want to see is action on the ground, and the action that they want to see is an end to hostilities in every field of combat. And that's obviously on the front, where the military front is in the Black Sea. And they also want to see, if I may say so, an end to the hybrid warfare, an end to the interference through the internet and online and so on in other states and so on. They want this to stop. The adults in the room, Dmitry, you talked about adults, want to see this stop. They want to see the fighting stop, and they want to see the talking begin. And those talks are going to be very difficult, and they're going to go on for a long time, and people are going to throw words at each other.
Okay.
And there's a lot of pain, but the fighting has to stop so the negotiations can begin. And that's what the adults in the room need to do, Dmitry. And those are your words, the adults, not mine.
Dmitry, I have to give you a chance to respond to that, especially to the adults' comment.
Well, I would rather say that I'm very disappointed that in such a serious program you have a clear Ukrainian propagandist. The one who is sitting behind the Ukrainian flag, because he's telling so many lies that I don't even know how to debunk it. And I will just respond by quoting President Trump when the so-called President Zelensky was making a cheeky appearance in the White House, saying that you don't have any cards in your hands. So if Ukraine is happy to fight, okay, let them fight. It's not our choice. Our choice has always been diplomacy. And we also know who is the aggressor state here. We know that Ukraine has been targeting its Russian-speaking population at least since 2014, with a lot of casualties there. This is, of course, something that you want to deny. As far as the adults are concerned, I think that we are the only, unfortunately, adults in the room, Russia and the United States. I wouldn't say that even Europe is really ready to change the optics from undermining Russia and trying to inflict its strategic defeat to Russia, which is absolutely futile and pathetic.
Okay, but Dmitry, you have stated that NATO, as well as the European Union's military aid, essentially is undermining the entire peace process in Ukraine. If Ukraine were to halt the delivery of weapons, I'm wondering if Russia would even consider making some additional concessions, perhaps withdrawing their presence from certain territories.
These certain territories, as you call them, is already part of Russian territory because they conducted referendums and they have expressed clear will to join Russia as Crimea did in 2014. So as far as the shipments are concerned, Ukraine is a clear private military company fighting for Western geopolitical interests. And that's why when you stop providing this private military company with the arms, everything will finish, of course. It will finish in any case because Ukraine is done on the battlefield. It's only a matter of time. So, of course, any ceasefire, complete ceasefire right now would be in the interest of Ukraine because Russian army is clearly having the upper hand. So I think this is out of big respect of President Putin to President Trump that we are engaging on this fact of conversation. And no matter how many times you laugh and smile, dear sir, you would not conceal the fact that Ukraine is pathetically losing on the ground.
Okay, I mean, Andrij, you have to respond to that.
I think the Engels airfield knows exactly how strong Ukraine is. I know that the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet knows exactly how strong Ukraine is. And no matter how many lies can be repeated, later today at the United Nations Security Council, the seat occupied, the Soviet seat that's being occupied by the Russian Federation, which is not a member of the Security Council, will try once again to put these things out. But unfortunately for them, the world has stayed together since the beginning of this full-fledged invasion. They do not want to work with a state that is continually doing war crimes against sexual crimes against children as young as 4, women as old as 82, filtration camps, which were just documented by the United Nations, filtration in Belarus and Russia, where they strip people naked, they put them into showers, and then they put tasers against their genitals. This is the kind of state that the United Nations have to work with. And if they can't work in a way that the rest of the world is per their international standards, what Russia is going to experience is being locked out of the international system on an ongoing basis.
Okay, Roger, I want you to sort of maybe chime in on the European perspective, because we know that the European Union has strongly supported Ukraine throughout all this, but you've also pointed out that Europe wants certain guarantees before upping or escalating its military commitments. How do you see Europe's role evolving as these U.S.-led talks continue?
Well, Europe is waking up, but Europe needed to do that anyway, not just because of the Ukraine crisis and the arrival of President Trump in the White House. Europe needs to raise its game. I mean, I'm curious to know from Dmitry what Europe would need to do to be recognized by, seriously, serious question to Dmitry, what Europe would need to do to be recognized by him as one of the adults in the room. What would it actually mean for Europe to be seen as an adult in the room from Dmitry's perspective? Europe is, and the UK, my country, is taking a lead on this, is taking a lead in trying to bring as many European countries together. European EU countries, and not just EU ones, have a strong sense of solidarity with Ukraine, a strong sense of shared values. It's not that we want to see winners and losers. We don't want to see a country invaded. We don't want to see it wiped off the map. We want to stand with Ukraine. Every European member state has its limitations, and the European Union is trying to increase the capacity, substantially increase the capacity of the EU. One or two European states do have significant capacity. It's not the same as the Americans and the Russians, but it's not insignificant. And that's the UK and France, and we want to see more. But Britain is stepping up its defence expenditure, and other states are being asked to do the same. And Europe is waking up to the fact that it needs to do more to defend itself, and to support Ukraine and to stand with Ukraine. But I think one has to be careful about the words one uses, not to overpromise, to be clear. But the intent is to continue to stand with Ukraine. Not acceptable that Ukraine should be wiped off the face of the map. Okay. It's not acceptable that the conflict should continue at all. The fighting needs to stop and the talking needs to begin.
Dmitry, I want to give a chance for you to respond to what Roger was saying, especially in terms of what Europe needs to do in Russia's eyes.
Well, I think Europe should think, first of all, about its own national interests. And of course, these interests are not transformed in supporting this project anti-Russia, aka Ukraine, Europe has made a big mistake in trying to build its own security architecture without Russia and against Russia. And I think that they should really take it into consideration and make the right conclusions, especially seeing the fact that Ukraine is trying to still live in this bubble of lies and propaganda that we are now witnessing from the Ukrainian participants in this regard. So I think that no matter what people say, no matter what people do, I mean, in Europe, in Ukraine, if they continue to deceive themselves, I don't think it will bring them to anything good. We are keen to continue our dialogue with the United States. It's in the interest of the whole world. We are the adults in the room. Europe has the chance to become so, but we'll see, of course. If Ukraine thinks that it's prevailing on the battlefield, okay, let they deceive their audience further. Ukrainians on the ground know what is really happening there.
Gentlemen, this conversation can go on for a very long time. I would like to thank all of you, Dmitry Polyanskiy, Roger Casale, and Andrij Dobriansky, for joining us here on the Newsmakers, but that's all the time we have for now. Thanks for watching. You can, of course, follow us on X and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrij Dobriansky, and we'll see you next time.